I thought it might be interesting to review a little bit about what the arbitrator said about the NALC contract. Some of you have probably seen on the NALC.org website where they had the the award from Dennis R. Nolan, and the statement he released about the arbitration and the binding agreement. And there's some interesting things to be learned, I think, from looking at that. If you remember back when all this stuff was going on, all these different people on YouTube who were making videos talking about we got to fight for this and that, and how the arbitrator has to look at what UPS gets and take that into account, as if UPS was the determining factor in what we are going to be making at the post office or something. There's certain language about how we have to be kept in basic kind of a parity, not parody, but parity, with private sector employees doing comparable work. And of course, whenever you see all those, the big raise that UPS got and everything, which wasn't quite as straightforward as a lot of people wanted to pretend it was. Everybody acts like, well, see, the most comparable thing to us as the USPS is UPS, so we should be getting at least what they are, and stuff like that. And everybody all fired up about that. You saw people who were saying that the arbitrator is not supposed to take into account the USPS's financial situation. And that's not really what the language was on that either, It's not that, he's not supposed to. The language in the part that everybody was always quoting is that he is not required to. But certainly, if he's reasonable and actually neutral, then he's going to take into account what's going on with the U.S. Postal Service. He's not just going to say, oh, well, the union wants this, so, oh, well, he's the whole point of having somebody neutral is that they are going to look at the arguments from both sides, and they're going to take into account what the union says, and they're going to take into account what the post office says, So it was always kind of a daydream that he wasn't going to take into account what the post office's financial situation is. And if you read his statement that he released when he, announced what the agreement is going to be, you'll see a lot of those things in there, and his reasoning behind how he looked at stuff, what the post office's arguments were, and what the union said, and how he took that into account. And also the fact that we had just had a tentative agreement that the union leadership had reached with the post office, and using that as kind of like the starting point for something that he could make an award based on. Just the fact that the parties previously had agreed to that, even though the membership voted it down. There's one point that I guess the post office made is the fact that a lot of postal workers didn't think they were being paid enough didn't mean that they weren't being paid enough in a comparable situation. Also, the fact they pointed out that a lot of CCAs, the majority of people who come to work at the post office as CCAs, they're making more than what they were before they started at the post office. And it's not like, like starting at the post office and becoming a CCA was some kind of a big step down for them. And that's only logical. Why would somebody take the job if they didn't think that it was a good move for them in their current situation, in their life? It's like you see these insurance company commercials, and they'll say, over 70% of people who switched to our insurance company saved money. Well, yeah, that's why they switched, If they weren't going to save money by switching to that insurance company from the one they already had, then they would not have made the switch to start with. And, so every insurance company could say that, because those are the only people that are going to switch, unless it's just that they got dropped by their previous company and they had no choice but to switch. That's why they're switching, because they're saving money. It's the same thing with people going out and getting a job at the post office. The people who are doing that Yeah, we might like to see people make more when they start, but there's some reason why people are doing it. They would not be coming to the post office and taking a job if they didn't feel that in their situation that it was the best choice for them. Some of these, guys we got coming on, maybe they're veterans and they just kind of got funneled into that thing. Well, hey, I can get on at the post office. A lot of these people, though, if it's true that they could just go somewhere else and, flip burgers and make more money and, or go get a job at Victoria's Secret in the mall and hang out in the air conditioning all day and fold clothes, and that's what they wanted to do, they would be doing it. So we have to assume when people start at the post office that they're doing it because in their life right now, it's a good choice for them. And to think that the post office or that some neutral arbitrator is just going to say, oh, you know what, let's give them all a $10 an hour raise is totally unrealistic. But you had all these people out there, I made some videos about some of this stuff last year, and just anytime you try to point out stuff like that or something that's not just in line with the most radical elements of, what the union is trying to achieve, then, people just trash you and tell you how stupid you are and all of that. If you do a search a lot of times on Google, which I did a few times, trying to find information about the contract and everything, see what's going on, there always seems to be this thing that pops up from some socialist union, some socialist group or something, talking about, starvation wages that the people at the post office are being paid and all this, like power to the people, let's have a revolution stuff. And you've got that element out there, but we were always going to get a contract that was in line with like financial realities of the Postal Service. The agreement, the tentative agreement that got voted down, I had three 1.3% raises in it and 7 COLAs, I think, because it was going to last longer, like 3.5 years instead of just 3 years. So our current one now, we got a 1.3% raise for the first year, which is the same as the tentative agreement, and then a 1.4 and then a 1.5. So a tiny bit more. The top step is going to get another $1,000 a year. That'd be nice. And then we've got 6 COLAs in there. Like, every half of a year, you get that COLA adjustment. That was one thing that was pointed out too in Nolan's statement, that this is something else that the private sector people don't really get, is those, biannual COLAs. So the situation, both sides are always going to fight for their own interest. That's what it's about. The union is always going to want more, regardless of what's happening with the Postal Service and its financial situation. Hell, I know I'd like more, always. Sure, why not? And you look at the way prices have increased, over these last few years. There's a lot of stuff that's gone up 20, 30, 40% that people need to, and the question is the Postal Service obligated to make sure that our wages increase to cover all of that? And in the real world, it's just not going to happen. It's sad to say, but no company could just say, well, hey, everybody, all of our employees, prices on a lot of shit have gone up, so we're going to give you enough money to make sure your style of life does not go down any. Are they supposed to take into account every time property taxes go up and your home insurance goes up and all of that? No company can do that unless it's just an endlessly funded charity that has trillions of dollars to waste. So it's not going to happen, And I think that's the thing we have to take away from that statement that was released by the arbitrator, is just that the reality check. Anybody neutral looking in at this, they're not just going to give the union all the things that we fantasize about. And more would always be nice. We're living in a crazy time right now, and who knows what's going to happen, Stagflation may end up hitting. I saw a really good video talking about that the other day. The last time we really had that was back in the 70s. The only difference was then is that people's salaries were going up enough to help them keep going and get through that. And right now, that's not going to happen. If we get into a situation again where economic outlook is basically flat and prices are still going up, it's going to be a lot of hardship for a lot of people. And really at the post office, we have it a little better than some people realize sometimes. Obviously, none of us like to have to tighten our belt and change our lifestyle just because everything is getting more expensive. But those are the realities of life sometimes. And these fantasies a lot of people had that the arbitrator was going to magically save us from all of that, they were never going to come true. I'm just happy that we got it done. As I said before in some of my other videos where I got a lot of flack, I was planning to vote yes on the tentative agreement anyway, so, I was never expecting arbitration to give us some magical 20-30% raise or something like that. And it's probably a good reality check for some of the people who have only recently started with the Postal Service to understand that that's not the way things work. And if they can't handle that, they probably not going to be too happy at the post office. On the other hand, if they took a job at the post office to start with, like I say, they must have thought there was something good about it compared to what they were doing before. And hopefully down the road, the post office will be able to stay healthy and survive so that they can get up to those higher steps of, salary.